Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, which you can get as an audiobook, a paperback, and the ebook is free. Free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Get more information as well as interviews with all the best people at middlegradeninja.com. My guest today is none other than editor Leila Sales. Leila, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Rob.
I am thrilled to chat with you. I have absolutely adored your book, The Campaign, and I've got all kinds of questions about writing, about editing, about everything else. But esteemed audience knows that I never summarize other people's biographies or other people's books because I want to keep friends in the industry. So if you would give esteemed audience kind of an overview of your background, and we'll go from there.
Sure, yeah. So I grew up outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and I always wanted to be a writer. I went to college at the University of Chicago. I majored in psychology, and then after I graduated from there, I started looking for publishing jobs in New York. I got my first job in the marketing department at Penguin Young Readers, and I did marketing there for children's books for about 2 years, and then I moved over to the editorial side of things at Viking Children's Books. I was there for about 10 years, and I edited books for readers of all ages, picture books through YA, and fiction, nonfiction, a little bit of everything. And it was really great. But about 3 years ago, I left there because I was moving to Austin, Texas, which is where I am now. And so since moving to Austin, I've been doing a lot of freelance editorial work and editorial development for various clients. And then in addition to all that, I also write books of my own. So my first book came out in 2010, and my most recent book, The Campaign, which you just mentioned, came out this past fall. So I've done 5 YA novels now, and I am in the process of writing my 3rd middle grade.
So just whatever it is in publishing, you do it all. So my first question is, psychology is where you start. When did you make? I know you were writing books as a child, right? You were writing picture books, and then, well, you know better than I do. How many books did you write before you graduated high school?
6. I mean, 6 like novel length books. If you're counting picture books, I don't know, infinite.
I count it all. So
I mean, they weren't terribly good, but whatever. That's how you learn how to write a good book, is you write a lot of not so good books first.
So you've got that passion. I know that you're competing in gymnastic meets at that time. You're doing debate tournaments around the world. And then out of all those talents, you pursue psychology. So were you thinking that you would become a psychologist, or what was the plan?
No, I never thought I would be a psychologist. I was just really interested in psychology. I mean, there's no, you can't major in undergrad in children's books. Or if you can, you couldn't at my school. And I knew what I wanted to do was work in children's books, and there's not a particular degree that you need in order to do that. I mean, I think it is very helpful to have a college degree. They generally expect to see that, and you should be able to read and write and speak critically, but you can do that with any number of liberal arts majors. And I was interested in psychology, and and I think it's relevant to storytelling, of looking at how people interact with one another. Like social psychology is the bit that most interests me. So it's about relationships among people and how they influence one another, and how they change their minds and stuff like that. And I think that comes up a lot in thinking about characters.
Do you have specific go-tos? Like, I don't know if you put together, what do they call that when you have a list of character traits that you assign and you fill out like a chart? Do you do things like that for your characters?
Not now. I did when I was a kid. That was when I was a kid and telling stories. I would draw a picture of each character and write down a lot of traits about them and what all their hobbies were and a list of their friends and stuff like that, and sort of like playing imaginary games, kind of where I would create a whole world. But now it's not. I don't pre-plan characters in that sort of way.
Gotcha. Did you find that got in the way, or did you find that you were then going at it? What I found when I've done that is if I know a bunch of things about a character, I'm going to find a way to mention exactly where they graduated from school, what their major
Yes.
was, and it may or may not be relevant to the story, but by God, I did so much work.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think that's how you like run the risk of telling rather than showing. Whereas if you just kind of like let these things come up naturally and you're showing through anecdotes and scenes, the experiences that they've had and how they respond to things, then I don't need to state like she was shy. It's a better read.
Fair enough. So okay, so you get the psychology degree. That's going to come in handy for characterization. And then is the plan eventually to write your own children's books, or are you headed straight for editorial, or are you just getting in and wherever you can find a way in?
Yeah, I always wanted to write and publish books of my own, but I also knew that it's very hard to make a living as a writer. So if you think like I started submitting my first manuscripts to publishers when I was 11 years old. And so by the time I graduated from college, I'd spent literally half my life trying to get published. So I knew that this could take a while and possibly never happen at all. And therefore my plan couldn't be like, oh, graduate college and sell a book, because it hadn't happened up until then. I had no reason to believe that it was going to happen any day soon. So I always intended to get a job, and it made sense to me to work in children's book publishing because that's really the only thing I've ever known about or cared passionately about. And I just felt like I was so well informed about that. So yeah, I started looking for pretty much any job in children's book publishing, and I would have moved anywhere that I could find a job in that field, and that wound up being New York because that's where the vast majority of jobs in children's book publishing are. And I do, I wonder if that might be changing going forward as COVID is opening up a lot more opportunities for remote work. I am hopeful that maybe publishing will start to embrace remote workers in a more long-term sort of way. But at the time, I went to New York a few times. I was like living with my mom in Boston, went to New York for a few times for various interviews with children's book publishers. And this job at Penguin doing marketing was the first one I got, so I nabbed it.
So now that you're in Austin, but you're still taking on some editorial work, and everybody's working remote for the pandemic anyway, it seems like right away one of the first things you could do to lower your cost as a publisher is stop paying those Manhattan rents. And that would open up, I would imagine, the hiring pool for a great deal more people living across the country who would prefer to pay the same amount of money for a full house as opposed to a studio apartment. Why aren't publishers? Why have they not done that historically? And what might you lose not being in New York where everybody else is congregating?
I'm so glad you asked this. I have so many opinions on it. So there are real benefits to being open to remote workers, and there are also real detriments to it. It's not like it's such an easy and obviously good thing to do, and publishers were just, foolishly failing to do it. There is a lot that you lose. It is possible that what you gain outweighs what you lose, but I'm not myself confident about that. So I think, to my mind, like the biggest reasons to do it is not even about lowering their expenses, though certainly they could do so if they weren't paying New York City rents. For me, it's a lot more about who it is that you get to hire. So obviously we talk a lot about how publishing has a diversity problem, or a lack of diversity problem. And it's not just a question of race, it's also a question of lived experiences, and an inordinately high percentage of people who work in children's books come from backgrounds quite similar to mine, which is to say, like, we grew up in New England or in the greater New York area and went to prep schools and or liberal arts colleges and then moved to New York City and had our parents help us for at least the first year when we came in making, $30,000. And if you want people with different lived experiences from that, and publishing says that they do, and I think you need to make it a little bit easier for different sorts of people to get into the field. And then at the other end, I guess I'm going to say, you have a lot of people who are in situations similar to me, and I've seen like many people, particularly women, go through the path that I have before of like, you work really hard, you're trained, you have success, you develop expertise, you rise through the rungs of the profession, and then at some point you don't want to live in New York anymore. And for many women, that's because they want to have children and they don't want to be raising them in a New York City apartment, or they want to be closer to their parents to have help with childcare or whatever it is. And so you often get people who have 10, 15 years of experience and expertise, and then they have to leave the field because they don't want to be in New York anymore. And all that seems like really foolish. Then on the flip side, though, right, so the benefits of being in New York and having everybody together is there is this, wonderful energy and exchange of ideas, and like the value of the in-person networking and learning opportunities kind of can't be overstated. I mean, when I was working at Viking, both it was collaborating with my teammates in the office. So, every day talking with people in design and copy editing and production and marketing and, building, brainstorming different ways to do things, but also building personal relationships that then we could draw upon in order to make things happen professionally that we wanted to have happen. But then in addition to that, I was also meeting with people outside of the house all the time, right? So multiple times a week, I would be getting lunch or coffee with literary agents. I knew people who worked in the field at all the different publishing houses, and all of that is just like incredibly, I mean, it's fun, it's vibrant, it's valuable. And, I think right now publishing is really suffering for not having those in-person opportunities. And they've made it work. And there are a lot of ways in which, COVID has forced publishing to get better at remote work, right? So they've set up a lot of computer systems and stuff like that that allow for this, whereas previously, we would circ physical passes. That's how it's always worked. Like they would print out a copy of the picture book and, on big paper, and they would put it on your desk and you would mark it up, and then you would put it on the designer's desk, and then they would put it on the copy editor's desk, and then you would print out the next copy, and this pile of papers that was the picture book would grow and grow. And, so now there is a technology for being like, okay, we don't have to print it out. And, as an editor, if you went on vacation for a week, you came back and your desk would just be piled high with all of the papers of all the books that had circed to you and were just, waiting for you to sign off on. So, so arguably some of that, it's like now that we have the system to do it virtually, we could just keep using the system to do it virtually. But then there's also some of it, like, I have friends who are designers, and when you're talking about like color correcting a picture book, publishers have like rooms with special light and, where you can print something off in exactly the color that the printer is going to make it, and then look at it under these lights and see, what the actual true color tone is going to be. Whereas looking at it on a computer screen, I don't really know how designers are doing that. It seems like not ideal.
They can't all get on maybe the same setting and say, okay, that's the setting we're going to repeat on the book, or it just doesn't work that way?
Well, when you're printing physical items, there's kind of like no substitute for the physical item,
I don't, but it makes sense. So, okay, well, if you come back from vacation, God, if your desk is piled up to a significant degree, how are you going to catch up? I mean, it seems almost like a penalty for having had the audacity to take a break.
Yeah, well, and there are certain things where if you are fortunate enough to have an assistant, if you're at a level that you have an assistant, you tell your assistant, here's what's supposed to come in while I'm out, and when this comes to my desk, take it off my desk and do the following thing with it. And some of it you just do it when you're back. I mean, yes, sure, it's hard to go away for a week or two, but I think that's true in most careers. After I'd been at Penguin for 10 years, I got a month-long sabbatical, which is this really cool. It had been a policy at Random House, not at Penguin, and so after the Penguin Random merger, rather than take away sabbaticals from the Random House people, which would have caused an uproar, they offered sabbaticals to all of us, which was great. And so that was one where I sort of, because I was going to be gone for a month, actually 6 weeks, I tacked on 2 weeks of vacation time. Like, I put up an out of office saying I'm not going to be considering any submissions that come in during this time. Like, I had no intention of coming back at the end of 6 weeks and going through every submission that had appeared in my inbox over the prior 6 weeks. I just had an auto reply saying, like, any email that comes in during this time, I'm going to delete. And if you want me to consider your submission when I'm back, like, my first day back in the office is whatever date, and you can send it to me again then.
So, okay, so there you are, 2 years in marketing at Penguin. Are you still writing your own stuff after hours, or are you working another job while you're doing that, or is that your main focus?
Yeah, so I did marketing my first 2 years out of college. I think that's right. So it was like 2007, 2008, roughly. And at first, I was not writing, just because, like, I was figuring out how to live in New York and be a grown-up and have a job and, all that. And then sort of once I'd figured that out, I was like, okay, I can go back to writing now. And it was actually, I was in the part of the marketing department that organized Penguin's presence at school and library conventions. So ALA and TLA, ILA, all of those. And so it was actually at ALA Annual where, I had to do a lot of grunt work to prepare for it. But then when I was there, I got to, meet all sorts of really big name authors and hear them speak and, like, go to big, like, I don't know, I got to go to a cocktail party with Judy Blume, stuff like that. Just really cool. And so one of the people that I heard speak, I think he had won some sort of award that year, so he was giving a talk, was David Almond, and he talked about how, if I'm remembering his talk correctly, it was something about how, like, he had intended to write adult books, I think, and he had been sort of like slaving away at that, but it was hard and not very fun, and he wasn't getting a ton of success. And then somebody suggested to him, like, why don't you write stuff that is easier? And he was like, that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how writing works. Anyway, but then he wrote like his first children's book, and he said how it was just like a much kind of like easier and more pleasant experience. And that's how he figured out that was like the space that he ought to be writing in. And I'm sure I'm misrepresenting aspects of this talk that he gave, but that was what I got from it. So at that point, I had written a humor column in my college newspaper, which I like really loved and did feel like very easy writing, just sort of just like, jot off 800 words about whatever it was that I was thinking about. And then they would run in the school paper later that week, and people would tell me that it was funny. So I started writing a novel that was kind of structured in that way. It was a series of vignettes that were all humorous vignettes that were all set in the same location and about the same characters. And so I started with that, and there wasn't really any sort of unifying plot other than it being in the same setting and the same characters. And then after I had a bunch of those, I sort of came up with a plot that I like superimposed on top of it. And that became my first published novel, which was mostly Good Girls.
And you had a background in improvisational comedy as well, correct?
Yeah.
So you did a little bit of everything. Gymnastics, you did debating, improvisational comedy, you've got a degree in psychology, and you're working in publishing.
To be clear, I was very bad at gymnastics.
Oh, well, okay, fair enough. So, um, 2 years in marketing. How do you work your way, for anybody that's listening and saying, "Oh, that Leila Sales, she sounds like she's had the dream career. I want to go and I want to do likewise." How do you get out of marketing into editing?
Yeah. So going straight into editorial, like editorial assistant jobs are so highly coveted, and it's really hard to, like, it's hard to get a job in publishing, period, but it is especially hard to get jobs as editorial assistants. And therefore, most people who become editorial assistants have some other sort of experience already, whether it's an internship or working in a different part of a publisher, which is what I had done. So yeah, I'd been in marketing for close to 2 years, and through that, I knew all of the publishers at Penguin Young Readers. I'd had cause to interact with them at these conferences, or I'd sent them advertisements for their review, or or occasionally would go around to their offices to bring them things or whatever it was. So they sort of, I was very intimidated by all the publishers, but they knew who I was, and I hope had, a fairly good sense of me as like, oh yes, our young colleague who, gets things done over in marketing. So I found out one of my dearest friends to this day, at the time, she was assistant editor in Viking, and somebody who was at a higher level was leaving because she'd had a baby, and so she could not afford to work and raise her child at the same time. So she was leaving, and my dear friend Kendra was getting promoted. And so Kendra came to me and she said, like, they're going to be looking for a new assistant here at Viking, and like, I think it should be you, because she knew I wanted to be in editorial. And so again, like, I knew the publisher a little, she knew me, and so I applied for the job going through like proper channels, and there's a system in place. So I had to tell my boss at the time that I was, just to submit my resume didn't take anything, but at the point that the publisher of Viking said she wanted to interview me, I had to tell my boss, like, I'm interviewing for this other job down the hall, which of course was like kind of scary, because I was like, if I don't get this other job down the hall, then my boss here in marketing is going to know that I wanted to leave. But fortunately, I did get offered the editorial assistant position at Viking, and it was really exciting. And so I moved from my cubicle in marketing down the hall to my cubicle in editorial.
Is it not assumed that if you're working a position within the publisher that everybody's got their eye on editorial? Like if you're waiting tables in LA, we know that you have an audition, you're going to try.
You want to be an actor. Yeah. No, it's really not. I mean, and I think if you want to get a job in publishing, you have to really convince whoever is hiring you that you want to be in that particular department. Nobody's gonna, it's like any job, right? Like, nobody's gonna hire you if you come in and you're like, yeah, really what I want to do is be an editorial, but like, I guess if what's available is a sales assistant position, like, sure, I'll take that. No, they're gonna hire the person who comes in and says they want to be a sales assistant. So while there are certainly people who work in other departments who deep down want to be in editorial, there are also many people who want to be exactly where they are. And I think some people think they want to be in editorial because they know they want to work in publishing and they don't really know what all the different departments are, but editorial is the one where they know what they do. So it sort of seems like, well, of course, if I want to work in publishing, I want to be an editor, because that's, it wouldn't occur to you to want to be a subsidiary rights manager, because you have never heard that term before, probably,
Well, once you're there and you see how the subsidiary rights manager shows up in their big, expensive, fancy car every day and is living the dream life, that might change things, right?
And I really do. I mean, I genuinely have friends who, who started out as editorial interns, editorial assistants, assistant editors, and then were like, and as they reached the point where they might be acquiring their own books, they were like, it's not for me. And they moved over to a different part of the publishing business. They're like, still love books, don't want to be an editor.
So 2000, and by the way, you mentioned Kendra. That's Kendra Levin.
Kendra Levin.
who has a 7-question interview available exclusively right now at middlegradeninja.com. Kat, never miss an opportunity for a plug. I met Kendra at a conference many years ago, which is a wonderful person to learn from and chat with.
She is the best. She also, while we're plugging Kendra, she wrote a book, which is a guide for writers called The Hero Is You. And it is, it's a craft book, but more than that, it's sort of like a life book of how to have like a happy and fulfilling creative life, and how to write in a way where it doesn't feel destructive or painful, or and feels like joyous and productive.
It is on my Kindle now because I had seen you elsewhere recommending it as your all-time favorite craft book.
I mean, I'm pretty obsessed with Kendra. I get like personally coached by her most days. So I've always say I'm glad she wrote this book so that other people can like benefit from her wisdom a little. But yeah, I mean, so many of my books, particularly my earlier books, she read the drafts and, wrote me like full editorial letters for free just because she's my friend. And I don't know who has the time for that. It is such an act of love.
Sounds like a good friend to have in your corner. So you've got all that going on, and then you start writing again in addition to all of your editing. And I wonder if you're editing all day and you're working with authors, and I know you give a talk on things that writers don't know about editors, and one of them is that they're not reading submissions there in the office. So I'm assuming you're taking a lot of that work home and doing that reading as well. So when are you finding time to write? What's your writing to editing ratio look like at that point?
Yeah. And I will say also, if people watching want to do further reading, I wrote an article about that for Publishers Weekly, which was what authors know that they want editors to know, what editors know that they want authors to know. So I have like a whole list of them. Yeah, and most of the reading of submissions does not happen in the office. And maybe, the earlier you are in your career, the less work you're taking home. So, I sold my first book while I was still an assistant editor. It probably would have been hard to do later on in my career when I was acquiring more, as opposed to, assisting my bosses, who were the ones who were doing the acquisitions. Yeah, I think I had not acquired for myself a single book at the point that I sold the first book that I had written, which I think just makes you simply have more time. But yeah, I was always, because certainly by the time I left Penguin, I was still writing, and at that point I was acquiring and editing a lot of books of my own and had a lot of submissions. And I don't know, for me it was just about like drawing clear boundaries of sort of like I would read submissions on the subway to and from work. I would read submissions before going to bed at night, stuff like that. But like when I had hours that were set aside for writing, I wouldn't sacrifice those. And if it meant getting back to an agent later than I wanted to, like, that's unfortunate and I felt guilty about it. But also like I had to do what I had to do. And this is why often editors are not reading full manuscripts, and why we talk about how important it is to have, first few chapters that like really grab you, because editors just have so many submissions and so little time to read that they're starting to read sort of, like if there's any opportunity to be like, okay, like I don't need to keep reading this, then they're going to take that opportunity and start reading the next submission.
Okay, what are common outs that you would be looking for? How long a subway ride are we talking?
Half an hour, but I'm a very fast reader.
How fast are you? I don't know if you clocked it or if you have a
really fast. I have not clocked it. I'm very fast.
When you're not editing, how many books would you say you read in a week, a month?
Oh, it depends I can't answer that. It depends what the book is, how interesting it is. If it's a book that I want to read and I'm engaged in the story, and I want to find out what happens, I'll read it in a day or two. But if it's, a nonfiction book maybe where I feel like it's important but not super narratively compelling, could be months. I'm usually reading a bunch of different stuff at once on a bunch of different formats. So I'll be, reading a manuscript for work, reading a manuscript because I might blurb it, reading, a book for like just my book club for fun, reading a friend's book, reading something I got in from the library because it sounded good, sort of like a bunch of stuff, and which again is why I like it has to be good, because otherwise it just kind of gets buried with everything else that I'm reading.
Have you always been a fast reader, or is this a skill that you've developed?
I have always been a fast reader. I remember in middle school, kids like
someone that could show me how to read faster than I do.
Practice. I think you just have to do it a ton.
Fair enough.
Yeah, when I was in middle school, I remember kids like making fun of me for how fast I read, and now I want to go back and be like, yeah, I actually got a career out of that. It would be hard to have my career if you couldn't read as fast as I do.
Well, I'm usually good for about 2, sometimes 3 books in a week if I'm really focused. But I know that's nothing compared to some speed readers who can do 10, 20 books in that same period of time.
I am not reading more than 2 or 3 books a week, because a lot of it is just, how much time I'm devoting to it, how much interest I have in it. It's not, like if I wanted to spend all day reading, I could get through 10, 20 books a week. But that's not what I want to do. And when you're an editor, often you're not finishing a book. You're reading pieces. You're reading the first 50, maybe first 100 pages of a dozen books a week. And then you're also rereading the same manuscripts that you're going to be publishing over and over and over again. So it's a very different sort of reading experience.
So when you were trying to clear those submissions out of your pile, like get out of here so I could focus on the ones that we're definitely going to publish, what are the most common outs that you were putting? What gave you permission to stop reading?
Yeah, so let me think. Sometimes it would be just that of like, I don't feel compelled to keep reading. Like, I'll just say like, this book feels too easy to put down. And like, if it's too easy for me to put down, I believe that it would be too easy for like a distractible 9-year-old to put down as well. So going along with that, it would be like, maybe the stakes feel too low, or maybe I don't care about what happens to this character, or maybe I don't buy the conflict. The conflict seems like it could be solved, but for the hand of the author just keeping this conflict going in order to like have a book, or I don't really care if the character resolves this conflict. I'm not that bothered by the existence of this conflict in their lives. Or, it could be writing style, just saying like, the voice doesn't sound authentically childlike or teenage to me. Or even I find the voice off-putting, and then it's like, I don't want to spend time with this manuscript. And then sometimes I always would read until I had a point where I could say definitively, like, here's why it won't work for me. And I think I could have gone through submissions a lot faster if I could just say, like, I know I'm not going to publish it and therefore I can pass on it, but I always felt obligated to explain why I wasn't going to publish it. So there were many manuscripts that I did read all the way to the end, and then my explanation for why I wasn't going to publish it would just be sort of like, I don't, like, it's fine. And if it was already a book, it would be a book. That would be fine. I'm sure people would read it. Some people might enjoy it. But like, I'm not in love with it, and maybe there's no reason why, or no reason that I can put my finger on, but I can't invest like the time and money in it if I'm not in love with it and not ready to like passionately advocate for it every day for the next 2 years.
I love this idea that you know you're going to pass on a book, but you want to read it to the end just so you have a good reason for why you're passing on it. And is
Yeah.
that to preserve your relationships with whatever editor or agent had submitted that manuscript to you, or just out of personal obligation because you yourself are an author and you want authors to be treated fairly, I assume?
Yeah, I think it's probably more that. I mean, definitely, agents are most of the agents who submitted to me were people who I knew, and therefore I wanted to give their manuscripts due consideration and give them some piece of useful feedback. But yeah, but I think more than that was like the author is a person who worked really hard on this. I know how long it takes to write a book, and I've had plenty of books get rejected. Like, it's not any easier to write a book that gets rejected than it is to write a book that gets published. Like, it's hard and time consuming and and emotionally involved either way. So just wanting to give them something, because I've gotten the rejections that are just like, it's not right for me, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to improve? Or is it just dumb luck? Like, so yeah, wanting to give authors what it is that I want to get.
And I know at that same time you're working on some pretty big properties. You were working on Corduroy. You're working on Ferdinand, The Snowy Day, and Angelina Ballerina. They'll be big, recognizable names. That's got to be a heavy burden when you've got Corduroy there on your shoulders. You've got children across or around the world. Don't let them down. How does that change when you're approaching a property like that versus something brand new? Is there a sense of I don't know if greater responsibility is the word. Maybe just what is the difference if you're working on a big Corduroy type project versus this is a brand new project that I hope will be the next Corduroy, but presently isn't?
I actually find it easier to work on something that's already a big property, because the support for it is already there from marketing and sales and everyone else, booksellers, etc., because it's already a known quantity that has proven its profitability. So, if you do a new book in the Corduroy series, it's not very hard to get approval to pay for that book, and you don't have to fight to get marketing to come up with a really good marketing plan for it or anything. That's all kind of assumed because it's Corduroy. But when you're doing, a debut YA novel, it's, those are ones that I take on because I'm like, I love this specific story. It's not like, oh, I love the character of Angelina Ballerina, I love the character of Ferdinand. It's like, I love this story and I want to get it out into the world. And therefore, I think there's like you feel a lot more like personal responsibility for it. And also it's a lot easier to feel like you failed that personal responsibility, because it's much more likely that marketing is going to say like, well, we're not going to put a ton of money into a big campaign for this debut novel. We don't know how it's going to do, so we'll kind of wait and see. And, it's just like, I really want to do right by my writers. Every editor does. And, especially it's like we know how much work they put into this and what their hopes for it are. And particularly if it's, an auction situation where it's like they chose us, like they chose me to be the editor and they could have chosen somebody else, then it feels like, if the book doesn't come out the way that I wanted it to, it feels like I'm like, betraying them in some way. And you don't get that so much with something like Ferdinand, because like, it's going to come out really well because it's Ferdinand and everyone's going to be excited about it. And B of all, the author isn't even there. At that point, you're dealing with an estate or a foundation who's managing the rights to the property. And they certainly have needs of their own, but it's not their creative baby.
So at any point do you get to, you're reading all day for all the reading you've got to keep up on, you're talking books, you're thinking books. I'm assuming at some point do you just go watch a movie, binge a TV show, play a video game, do something else, or is it just stay in the zone with books?
Just books. But yeah, now that, again, the past 3 years have been different because I left Penguin. So now I've watched some TV shows. I'm still not great with TV shows, but like I watch them sometimes. Like definitely getting better, trying to catch up.
TV is one of those things where, aside from the really big ones, like I'm watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier, naturally, the really big ones that I know I'm going to have conversations with people I like about, I'll watch that once through. But anything else, like I was trying to watch the Hannibal show, and it was like, oh, if this were a book, if I was reading Thomas Harris and somebody killed somebody with an eel, which what a wonderful middle grade example I've chosen, but that did happen in one of those books, I would do the work of convincing myself for Mr. Harris. I'd be like, oh, I don't know, I'll add some details in my mind, I'll make it work. But if I'm watching it and I know it's actors, nope, I can't do it. Get me a book. Let me do the directing on this. I'll make sure it's believable.
That's very funny. Yeah. No, I like TV. I like movies. I just kind of like stories in general. Like, maybe regardless of medium, I like stories.
Are you still doing gymnastics or hobbies completely outside of storytelling?
Definitely not gymnastics. I would severely hurt myself. I like to ride my bike, though I fell off my bike yesterday, so I don't know if you can, I have like I fell on my lip, so it's like a little swollen. But I love riding my bike, and I love traveling. Obviously, I haven't done much of that this past year because of COVID, but even when I was working at Penguin, I took every single one of my vacation days and would go as many places as I could, and seeing friends, and sure, I have other hobbies. I sleep a ton, like to the point where it's probably my major hobby. Dance parties. My boyfriend and I do a weekly dance party that we've been streaming since COVID began. So we do a weekly streaming dance party, and so doing, promotion for that and stuff like that. So yeah, I find many things to keep myself busy.
Where can a esteemed audience tune in to watch these dance parties?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. It is at twitch.tv/Brian Blackout. And we also, or I talk about it on my Twitter, like every Monday, I remind people to come to our streaming dance party. So yeah. And then we started a newsletter about things to do in Austin. So I spent a lot of time like looking at interesting things to do and like compiling them for newsletter readers and stuff. So yeah, there's plenty of stuff that I do that is not for profit, is just because it's stuff that interests me.
And then, okay, so while you're editing and then versus now, what does your writing look like? I mean, are you setting a firm, I will write for 2 hours first thing in the morning, and then the rest of the day can be whatever everyone else needs from me? Or how do you structure your day then? And then how do you structure it now, where presumably you pulled back on a lot of those editing responsibilities?
Yeah, when I was at Penguin, I would choose one evening after work, after I left the office, that would be like my writing evening. And the idea was like I wouldn't go to the gym, I wouldn't cook dinner, I wouldn't clean or talk to friends. Like I wouldn't do anything that would take any time. So if I got, I would leave the office on time. So if I got home from work at 6:30, then I would have a solid 4 hours uninterrupted writing time, and it would be a long day because I would have already worked, but whatever, you have one long day a week and like you can do it. And then also I would write all day on Sundays, usually with one of my dear friends, Rebecca Searle, she now does adult novels, and she's today marked her 6th week on the New York Times bestseller list for her book in 5 years. But she and I would generally spend Sundays, we'd sort of like get some brunch and then sit in my house or in my apartment and write for however many hours. So sort of like I only got like one real weekend day, but that was okay. And I produced a number of books that way. Now I'm way worse at managing my time because I don't have a 9 to 5. So I have like no advice to give now. Now it's like I just kind of like do things as they come in. It's never clear to me when I'm supposed to be writing or when I'm supposed to be like doing editorial work. I often do the editorial work because that has like clear deliverables for clients, as opposed to write a book, which is this sort of, amorphous deliverable that is due at some point in the future. So Yeah, I don't know. Don't come to me for advice on self-employment yet. I'm still working that part out.
But you have produced a number of books, and I assume are going to continue to do so. So, if you've got one weekend day, what's a good day look like? Do you have like a word count you're trying to hit? How do you for that?
Yeah, on days that I'm writing, I my goal is 1,000 words, and often I will write more than 1,000 words. It's sort of like if you say that's what I have to hit, then often you'll find like by the time maybe the first 100 words are hard, but by the time you hit 1,000, it's pretty easy to just be like, oh, I'm in the middle of this scene. I know what's going to come next. So I'll just keep going. Um, uh, and there are plenty of days when I don't write, and it's fine if I say like this is a non-writing day, and I'm going to be working on the following editorial projects for various clients, and responding to emails and so on and so forth. The only real hard ones are where I say like this is going to be a writing day, and then I don't write because I just do all the other work, and then at the end of the day, it's like you should feel accomplished because you responded to all those emails and did all that editing stuff, but you don't actually because you didn't write anything and you had said at the beginning of the day you were going to. So those are the not good days. Those are the days I'm trying to have less of.
Anytime I try to designate a whole day for writing, I find that will be the day the house gets clean. All my emails are caught up. Everything else but the writing couldn't have been done better.
And this is why everybody talks about like having writing sprints. And if you say like I'm only giving myself 45 minutes to write, you're going to do more than if you say like I could write anything at any point over the course of this whole day. And I like it's like I like writing with friends. Like I like meeting someone in a coffee shop and being like, okay, we have 2 hours to write together here in this coffee shop. And then if emails come in, I'm like, no, you'll get to that later because right now is your only chance to sit in this coffee shop and write across from your friend. But COVID's really messed up that routine.
It's messed up a little bit of everything. Although I know I've done some Zoom meets where you can check in for a few minutes. Hey, how you doing? You're writing. Okay, let me check back with you in 45 minutes, an hour. What are you going to try to accomplish in that time? Great. This is what I'm going to try and accomplish. See you then, and we'll tell each other that we did it or we didn't and why.
Yeah. Yes, I've done some of those too. There's a thing called Cave Day, and they do like Zoom. The idea is sort of like going into the like metaphorical cave where you're just focused on one thing for like a 45-minute sprint. So I've done some sessions there, and that was helpful for focusing.
Gotcha. And when you're writing, do you have like a specific place, some little rituals that you perform to get in the spot? Do you have a favorite beverage that has to accompany you? What does Leila Sales writing look like?
I think it's pretty boring. I was just saying this to somebody the other day, how writers in movies, it always looks so exciting, this sort of montage of them feverishly dashing off words, and actually what it is like somebody kind of like slumped at their computer wearing pajamas and like eating chocolate chips straight out of the bag. Yeah, I like having writing snacks. I like having some tea or something, but I'll write anywhere with anything. It's more pleasant with chocolate chips, but
fair enough. So okay, I want to talk about lots of things, but I want to talk about you writing and how all of your experience as an editor comes to inform how you compose a middle grade book. And luckily, I know of just such a one. One thing that surprised me that of the things that you're doing for fun that you're not doing is politics. So are you still involved politically in your spare time?
Yes.
Let's talk about the campaign, and let's talk about politics, because you've done this incredibly brave thing of producing a politically themed book that releases in September of 2020, which is just, that might be the most contentious election I think I might ever live through. Certainly the biggest nail biter. So I promised I'd never summarize other people's books. If you would, give us teamed audience an overview of the campaign, and we'll kind of go from there.
It's about a 12-year-old girl named Maddie who feels out of place at school. She doesn't get good grades. She doesn't have a ton of friends there. She feels like the only thing she's really good at is art, and the only place where she really feels at home is art class. So when she finds out that the woman who is running uncontested to become mayor of their town intends to cut all funding for arts education, Maddie is very concerned, and she knows that she has to do something to stop this woman from becoming mayor. She tries a bunch of different tactics, and ultimately what she settles upon is getting her babysitter to run for the position of mayor against this woman. And in trying to organize the campaign for her babysitter to win this election, Maddie discovers that there are actually a lot of other things she's good at, not just art, and she also discovers that she has a lot more of a community among the other kids at her school, particularly the other kids who are interested in arts, than she had ever realized before.
And I had read that you were involved in your first mayoral campaign at 12.
Yes, I based Maddie loosely on that.
A third grade language arts textbook. So how much of this is a little bit, not autobiographical, but how much of this is based on your experience?
Yeah, no, a lot of it is inspired by, I was always politically engaged. Yes, I started a petition against our language arts textbook in third grade. I started volunteering on my first mayoral campaign when I was 12. It was such a other kids were going to play soccer or whatever, and I'm no good at soccer. So my parents were like, it's fine, we'll just drop you off at these campaign headquarters and do whatever they tell you to do. And, it's a cool experience for a kid. You feel like in one of those situations where it's all hands on deck and we need to do whatever we can to win this election. Nobody's like, oh, there's the child over in the corner, give them some toys to play with. They're like, great, if you can do work, do some work. We don't care how old you are. We don't care what your background is or your education level or whatever it is. Can you stamp envelopes? Okay, go stamp envelopes.
Is that part of the appeal, is you get to feel like you're not a kid, you're a full adult participating like Maddie feels in the story?
Yeah, you're making a difference. And, we act like, I don't know, adults often act like kids can't really make a difference. And this book shows that they can. And I think that's a lot of why kids read books, is wanting to feel like, what they do genuinely matters, and not just oh, it matters, in my class or to my friends. I think this is why kids like epic stories like Harry Potter, something like that. The idea of, what I do matters on a global existential scale.
And the nice thing about this is you can be a muggle and pull off this campaign stuff. In fact, you've got a multi-page call to action here at the back of the book in your author's note, where you've got multiple websites, you've got some advocacy groups that folks can join. You're recommending that they form their own club, that they volunteer for a political candidate. Was this, because of the timing, not to talk about politics too much, but was this motivated by the tragedy of 2016, or had you always planned to write a book along these lines, and that just happened to be a happy coincidence? Well, happy is the wrong word, but a coincidence.
No, it was very much motivated by the election of 2016. I think a lot of writers found that they had trouble writing after that, because it felt like a lot of the stuff maybe that we had been writing before felt comparatively unimportant. And so I think a lot of writers sort of had this crisis of confidence of why am I writing I don't know, stories about a high school boy and girl falling in love or whatever, when when there's really serious issues happening in the world that need to be confronted. And so I think we've seen a lot more kind of politically and socially engaged books over the past 5 years for that reason. And I edited one for Penguin as well. I developed a book for Penguin called The Little Book of Little Activists, which was this photo illustrated book of real kids at the Women's March and other various actions, and them like with their signs, and then it had quotes from a bunch of real kids on topics like what democracy means to me and what freedom means to me, what feminism means to me, stuff like that. So I think a lot of us were sort of motivated to look more in that direction, and that was what inspired the campaign as well. But with the campaign, I was very careful to not make it a partisan book. Like, nobody in the book has a political party. Political parties aren't mentioned in it, because I think it's so easy for us to get bogged down in party politics and the idea of like, sort of viewing politics as like two sports teams, and like, there's my team and then there's the other team, and my team's the good guys and the other team's the bad guys. And it's really simplistic, really ignores all of the issues and like the people who are actually affected by the issues. And it just becomes a like, rah, rah, my team sort of thing. So in the campaign, because it's focusing on a local election, we don't need to know what party anybody is. It's more about like, what do they want to do for this town and how do they want to get it done? So, the nice thing about the book is like, no matter how strongly you identify as a Democrat or a Republican, like the book still works for you.
I think I 100% agree with that. And I don't think the word Republican or Democrat even appears anywhere in the book.
No, it doesn't.
Although when one party is trying to cut funds for arts, and the other party running would like to see a continuation of art,
it implies
draw their own conclusion.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm trying to find it. There is a quote in here that I felt was almost speaking directly to me, which I feel unlikely, since you and I are just meeting, to the best of my knowledge, for the first time tonight. But I think maybe it was speaking to the entire country. And of course, I had the call to action queued up. I cannot find the quote, but you were talking specifically, it's the gentleman at the farmer's market who is telling Maddie when she's overwhelmed and it feels like it would be easy to give up, not to give up. I can't. Nope, I did find it. Woo, here we go. Okay. So Maddie's feeling a bit discouraged. She's got to get, 350 signatures in order to get her former babysitter, Janet, on the ticket to run for mayor. And she's talking to this gentleman who's out, and he's campaigning, or he's trying to get people involved with the environment. She says, he said, discouraged, like you put in all this effort and it hasn't really gotten any better. Nah, he said, because if I hadn't put in that effort, then it would have gotten so much worse. I suppose that could be true. Furthermore, he said, if you want something, you've got to go after it. It doesn't matter if you think you're never going to get there, because you for sure won't get there if you don't even try. Proceed boldly toward your dreams. Even if you never arrive at the destination, at least you'll be headed in the right direction. So I believe that is what that character would say in that situation. But is that a little bit of the Leila Sales philosophy that's being shared with us?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think, right, when you're writing a book, when you're writing a book for children, you always have to be careful about how much do you have a grown-up who knows everything, just kind of, announcing to the character what it is that they should do, explaining it to them, like, because obviously, like, most everything in the book has to come from your child protagonist. But yeah, that was one where I felt like, in context, it was okay to have that little sort of monologue by him. And yes, I totally feel that way. I mean, both in terms of political activism, but also in terms of, like, I don't know, career stuff, life stuff, whatever it is. Like, if you can know where it is that you want to be, you can start heading towards it. And what's that quote, like, aim for the moon, even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. Like, it's all sort of that same idea.
And I'm assuming you're still politically active now, when you can be. Has there been a point over the past 4 years or beyond where you've been discouraged and said, well, what's the point? This is madness. The people around me they must be crazy. 3 million more people voted for this man who told us to inject ourselves with disinfectant, without mentioning a specific political party.
Whosoever that person may be.
You see 3 million more people voted for that. I'm like, oh, my fellow countrymen are crazy. How could we possibly come to terms and reason? Do you still hold out hope that is possible, that bridges can be built?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, yes, what you just said really resonates with me. And, right now, I will say I'm feeling very frustrated. Like as I said, I moved to Texas 3 years ago. I'm in Austin, which is a very liberal city, and the politics are very much aligned with my own. And for both the 2018 election and the 2020 election, it seemed like, turning Texas blue was really on the table. And I was volunteering with an organization this year that was trying to flip the Texas State House. And we only needed to flip 9 seats, and we had 17 different seats that we really believed, and all the data indicated could go either way. They're mostly in the suburbs of Dallas and Houston, and we did a lot of work to try and target those seats to try and flip the state house, so that when for many reasons, but one of them being that when redistricting happens this year, because, the 2020 census, so this year everything gets redistricted, and Texas is hugely gerrymandered. Austin is cut into 6 different congressional districts with these sort of little pieces of a pie coming into Austin, and then expanding out through the through the Texas countryside, in order to ensure that there's not a Democrat in Congress representing Austin. So all of that seemed really doable. And then when the results for the 2020 election came in, we didn't win any of those 17 seats. And that felt really dispiriting, because so much of it has to do with expectations. And when your expectations are we could do this, and you spend months telling people this is within our grasp, and if we act and if we try, and then when it doesn't happen, you're but I did act and I did try. And then now, of course, when you see things in Georgia, all these new efforts that they're putting through in order to try and restrict voting rights access, and Texas is going to be the next state where, where those sorts of policies are on the docket. And, because it's everyone can see that Texas is starting to trend purple. And so it's what can the party in power put into place in order to stop that from happening? All of which, again, even more makes me feel if we'd made the change in 2018, if we'd made the change in 2020, that would have been great. But as it is, now we're going to have yet another setback. So yes, I feel discouraged a lot. And I do, I wrote the campaign because it does sometimes feel like adults are a lost cause, and so many of us didn't receive a proper education in civics as children, and that leaves us open to the whims of whatever Twitter is telling us on any given day, and it's hard to get adults to want to learn about civics. So if you can start out with kids, teaching them about here's how to, again, not trying to give them my political beliefs, but just things about here's how to process news, here's how to figure out what issues are that matter to you and understand why somebody would see them from a different perspective. Here's how the executive branch is supposed to work and how much power it is supposed to have versus the legislative and judicial branch. Just stuff that is just true about America, regardless of what party you're in. It's if you can learn that when you're 9 through reading the campaign, then maybe 10, 20 years from now, it will be better here.
I like it. I've kind of settled. Like I had enough arguments with folks on the other side of the aisle to realize that facts don't matter. There is no fact I could state that was going to change anybody's mind. And so, but what I have decided for myself thus far is that if I could just encourage more people to read, reading promotes empathy, and if you've got more empathy for your fellow Americans, you do whatever you want culturally, but we can maybe move that needle a little bit toward a better country.
And that's one of the things that Maddie learns in the campaign too, right? Like she starts out just being like, here's the thing that matters to me. It's arts education, and I just need to protect that. But then as she starts to know and care about other people in her community, she's like, oh, well, they also have interests that are as important to them as mine is to me. And, this election isn't just about what I need or what I get. And people who can just kind of opt out of the system, who say like, I'm not going to vote in this election because like I don't go to school and I don't have any kids who go to school and I'm not interested in art. And Maddie's sort of like, but that shows a complete lack of empathy for me. And so so that's definitely what it's trying to get across.
So then I've asked you these questions. I'm making this book. It is very serious, but it's also very funny. I can't emphasize that enough. Those improvisational comedy skills are on full display throughout, because there was a good laugh almost every chapter, and sometimes several. These are short chapters. So as far as your writing style, let's break it down. How long does a book like this take you to write?
Depends how much I'm focusing on it and how much I'm doing other stuff. Like I think if I just sat down and actually wrote it, I could do it in a few months, but that's never how I do it. It usually takes me like at least a year. Not because it's so much text, but just because like, I'll write for a few days and then I'll think about it for a month. So probably longer than it needs to, but I think even the month that I spend thinking about it and not typing is like part of the process.
Fair enough. I mean, it must be. It's producing quality work.
Yeah. Thanks.
Do you have some hard and fast rules as far as the chapter lengths seem pretty, not uniform, but pretty consistent as far as how long they were and where they're ending? Do you have some hard and fast rules about chapters? Go ahead.
I tend to, in my middle grades, the chapters tend to be a bit shorter. I tend to aim for like around 5 pages, or maybe roughly 1,000 to 1,500 words per chapter. Sometimes it's longer than that or shorter than that, and that's fine. If it's tons longer than that, then I'm like, okay, it seems like a sign that I should split this into 2 chapters, and then I do. I think a chapter ending, every chapter should have something in it that is going to propel you forward to the next chapter. So some sort of unanswered question that we need to read the next chapter in order to find out the answer, or some kind of promise about like an interesting scene that's to come, of like, oh, she was really dreading her run-in with her Aunt Helen the next day. So then you're like, oh, I want to find out why she's dreading it, and what's Aunt Helen's deal. So like I'll turn the page on the assumption that the next chapter is going to give that to me. So, I think not every chapter needs to end on a cliffhanger. It just needs to give you a reason to turn the page again.
Well, if a cliffhanger is not available, which is one thing I miss about writing zombie books, I got to write another one because there's always somebody getting chased by a zombie. The cliffhangers are great.
Yeah.
But when you don't have the great advantage of zombies or a cliffhanger, what are good notes to end on that are going to keep that reader propelled forward?
I mean, sometimes I think you can end on like a moment of peace and kind of like, I want to see here like how, the first chapter ends. We've just introduced this conflict of kids at school kind of ostracizing her, and it ends in the sentence, and somehow I'm the weird one. That doesn't make sense out of context. I don't know. That one just sort of ends with like a wry observation. And then the next one ends with a really obvious question. She finds out in chapter 2 about this woman who's going to become mayor and get rid of arts. And so we end with the sentence, without art, what was I going to do? So that brings you very clearly to the next chapter of like, okay, she's going to tell us what she's going to do. So let's find out what it is. Chapter 3 ends, the babysitter is saying, like, you know, here's something we could try. Maddie's like, are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure this woman's just evil. The babysitter says, I have no idea, but there's only one way to find out. So we're like, okay, I guess in the next chapter we're going to find out what the one way to find out is. So, yeah, like that.
So it seemed like the end on multiple character points with insights into Maddie, so that if the cliffhanger is not available, I felt like you were investing us. Not just Maddie, we're also invested in Janet. We're also invested in my friend, as it Kevin.
My friend Daniel.
My friend Daniel. I couldn't remember. I love that name though. So and then Molly, Holly, and Polly. Just great names throughout. But I felt like character was something that got hit again and again to keep us focused on Maddie. We're never seeing anything that's not in some way filtered through Maddie's perspective. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's first person. So I think you would do the same even if it was third person. Like, you know, she's the main character, so her perspective is the only one really that matters. But yeah, definitely. Because, I think any book should be about, or any novel should be about the main character's arc, right? Like their internal journey. So if they start out thinking or believing something that, like, even if there are other characters in the story saying, like, that's not true or that's not consequential or whatever it is, like, the process of the story has to be them coming to understand that for themselves. It can't just be, again, like some grown-up who knows everything telling them on page 2, like, oh, the thing you're worried about is silly, or here's the solution, or whatever it is, because then, like, they're not going through that growth on their own.
Gotcha. You do a very nice job. I don't think there's one scene where Maddie sits and thinks about her problems or her situation. She's always on the move. She's always doing a thing. Which I absolutely love. There's no scene that exists solely for exposition, and I've seen you talk elsewhere that you try to avoid those. How do you avoid those? Because obviously at some point we got to get some exposition to know what's going on. What are your rules about exposition?
Yeah, I mean, I think like working it into a scene, and the scene has like an interesting setting, something is going on there. So it's not like I'm sitting at home alone quietly in bed thinking. It's, I'm at the basketball game or whatever it is. So even if we have a line of, I'm thinking about this, then we have the action of, the basketball dribbled toward me or whatever. And so it doesn't feel like, oh, it's just like 3 paragraphs of you ruminating. And putting some of it into conversation, like it's always going to be better if it's like, okay, let's review the facts of the case. Let's review what clues we have available to us, is always going to be better if it's 2 characters like talking about them and bouncing them back and forth than just one character sitting in bed and thinking about what it is that we know. And then also sometimes like you write the scene where the character, I always tell people like, you don't need to have scenes where the character decides to do something, just have them do the thing. Sometimes you need to write the scene where they decide, they consider their options, they talk about how they're getting to the thing that they're going to do, and then you just take all that out and you just like open up the scene on like, there they are at the place that they were going to, doing the thing they were going to do. The example I like to use is one of my favorite movies is called 10 Things I Hate About You. It was like a teen comedy from my adolescence, and there's this scene in it where the main love interest, he serenades the girl who he's into with like the full band of like their full high school band, and they go like, and he has a mic and he's singing to her, and like she's out on the soccer pitch and his voice is coming through the loudspeakers, and he and this like 100-person band are like marching in formation, and what's so great is that you never, like, logistically, in reality, that would be very complicated, but you never actually see a moment where they are planning any of this, and therefore you don't wonder about it. There's not, like, a full scene of him being like, like, all right, here's how I'm going to get the mic, and then figure out how the mic hooks up to like the wireless PA system so that she can hear me on the soccer pitch, and like, here's the song that I need to learn so that the band can, like, that's all boring. It's boring. It doesn't matter. It's just like, just cut to like a friend saying to him, like, man, you got to make it up to her. And then like cut to she's at soccer practice and he like comes out singing.
And then let's talk about the illustrator. Is Kim, how do you say Kim's last name?
Blockwood.
Did you work with her ahead of time? And I know that obviously you're an editor of picture books. You have the experience of authors having to trust their illustrator, but you're really trusting the illustrator through parts of this to deliver almost whole scenes between characters, and pivotal character moments are delivered. Plus some of the best, not the best jokes, but some of the really quality jokes are placed in those illustrations as well. So how much did you work with her ahead of time, or did you have notes? How did you pull that off?
Mm-hmm. So I will say this was Kim's first book that she illustrated, and I think she did an amazing job. And for the art, I gave like vague descriptions about what each thing would be. So saying like, this shows them in Jordan's hothouse, though I didn't really say much about what it would be. But then I would write down what the dialogue bubbles would be that would appear in that art. Or then if there were like any labels for things in the art, I would write down what those labels would be. So all the text in the art, all the like jokes in the art came from me. But, it'd be like, let's see if we can pull up one here. So like, this is just the first one that I came up with. So here I said, like, here's what Maddie says, here's what Daniel says, here's what Janet says. But I didn't describe anything about, what they'd be wearing or what their motions would be or where they'd be sitting or, all that came from her. And I learned a lot about how to do this actually from editing Max Brallier's Last Kids on Earth series, which is another one where the art and text are really deeply intertwined, and I've edited a number of books in that series, so I've seen how Max describes just how much he needs in the art and what he what he just like leaves to the illustrator's imagination. And so I used an approach very similar to his as I was writing my manuscript.
So you're writing just a brief description of what the art's going to look like as well as the dialogue? Are there doodles someplace?
There are no doodles. I can't draw. So, no, it'll maybe say like, the description for this one would be like, Maddie, Janet, and my friend Daniel celebrating together. And then it would have their, each of their dialogue bubbles, and she can decide what celebrating together looks like.
Oh, well, that's still a huge degree of trust right there. That's characterization.
I'm not a very visual person, so it's not like I have some specific vision in my head and I'm going to be disappointed if it doesn't look like that. Anything that I say, I'm sort of like, yeah, that seems cool. I wouldn't have pictured that. I don't know. Yeah, I didn't initially envision the book with art, actually. It was my agent's idea. He said, people are so into graphic novels right now, and would you do this book as a graphic novel? And I was like, I don't think so, because like I've never written a graphic novel, and I don't read a ton of graphic novels, and therefore I was like, I don't really feel comfortable at this stage, like writing in that format. And I was like, but I have read a ton of Last Kids on Earth in like great detail, so I know how to do a book where illustrations are, playing a part in telling the story, but it's not pure like comic book panels. So I was like, I could do that, and that seemed like a good compromise. And my agent said yes. So.
And your agent, of course, is Stephen Barbera. Is that right?
Yes.
Is it Barbara or Barbera? I'm never sure the pronunciation.
Barbara, just like the name.
Gotcha. And did you have you had him since your first book, or when was that somebody you met while you were an editor, or did you submit the old-fashioned way with a query? How did you hook up with your agent?
I did not submit the old-fashioned way. It's like, I feel like my story about how I got my agent is annoying to people who don't work in the industry because it contains no useful nuggets of wisdom. But working at Penguin, I was friends with the author Lauren Oliver, who obviously is a very successful YA and middle grade and now adult novelist as well. But at the time, she was an editorial assistant down the hall for me. Stephen was representing her. And incidentally, Lauren and Stephen and I all went to the same college. So Stephen and I were a few years apart. We hadn't overlapped there, but Lauren and he had. So when she was looking for like agent contacts, she went to him. He signed her, and then I met him at a party that we were all at. And I was like, "Oh, you're Lauren's agent." And I said, "I'm writing a book." And he said, "Oh, that sounds great. Send it to me when it's done." So again, like there's nothing actionable there. You can't, it's just annoying. You can't do that if you don't work in New York City publishing.
Well, I think we've just come across a nice, clear argument as to why one might want to be in New York for at least a portion of one's career.
Yeah.
Publishing. And did you say it like with a, a detached, yes, I'm a literary agent. You know that about me now. So tell me about your book. Yes, send it to me. Can we please move on with the rest of the party? Or did you give him a full pitch right then and there?
So, so this was 2009. And at the time, as I was working on the book, which became mostly Good Girls, its working title was Wayward Girls. So I said to Stephen, I was like, "Oh, I'm writing a novel." And he said, very much with polite interest, he said, "Oh, that, like, that's nice. What's it called?" And I said, "It's called Wayward Girls." And he said, "Oh, like Winter Girls," which was a Laurie Halse Anderson YA novel that had recently come out, and that was phenomenally good, got like 6-starred reviews, just like super powerful about girls suffering from eating disorders, like beyond good. So I said Wayward Girls, and he said, "Oh, like Winter Girls." And I said, "So much better than Winter Girls." And Stephen is like very deadpan, and he didn't know me, and so he looked at me and he said, "Really?" And I was like, "No, of course not, I'm kidding." And he was like, "Okay, well, send it to me anyway." So that was how we met story.
And I derailed us a little bit because I'm curious if you're going back and you're with the campaign, you're not making this into a graphic novel, but you are making way for illustrations throughout. I'm assuming there was a much longer Snyder cut someplace where you took out whole sections of prose to replace with "here's a good opportunity for an illustration." So how many drafts does that take? Can you go back and easily do that in one draft and cut it down further, or how does that process?
Well, so one of the really nice things about having a literary agent is that I always get Stephen to weigh in, or almost always get Stephen to weigh in before I'm done with a manuscript. So this one, I think I probably sent him the first, maybe 75 pages and said, "What do you think of this as a direction for my next book?" And that was when he said, "Could you put art in it?" So I wasn't rewriting the whole thing, like just the bit that he had seen.
Oh, okay. So you hadn't finished the full manuscript?
I had not. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And then when it comes to working with your editor, is Maggie Lehrman, is that right?
Yeah. This was my first time working with Maggie on the campaign, and then we're doing my next middle grade together as well.
So in that case, do you sit down and say, "Hey, look, I've done this job. I've got the experience as an editor, so go get some coffee. Have a nice afternoon. Work on some of your many other projects. I got this for you." Or is it a situation where the dentist goes and complains when he has to get her teeth cleaned at the other dentist, and wants to be was uncomfortable the whole time, or is a better model patient because they know what to expect?
I like to believe I'm a better model patient. I guess you could ask my editors if they thought that was true. But no, I think there are definitely things. There are some things where I'm just like more chill about them because I understand that like the editor doesn't really have a say over them, or I can sort of like, for example, like I have authors who will change a lot of things in first pass pages, and that puts in extra challenge for the designer and the copy editor. So I don't do that, because like I've worked with designers and copy editors and I'm aware of how that puts an undue burden on them. So that's something that like maybe wouldn't occur to someone who hasn't worked in-house. No, and I mean, I think I like being edited as much as anybody likes being edited, which is to say, like, initially you're like, no, why can't you just think it's perfect the way that it is? And then you're like, okay, these are good suggestions, and I will make these changes. And I think also sometimes I'm like every bit as helpless as anyone who doesn't have, where I'll be like, I understand we need more of a conflict here. We need to make, we need some sort of resolution in this plotline or whatever it is, but like, I don't know what it is. Like, the reason why that plotline's not resolved is because I don't know what the resolution looks like. So like, help me. Stay on the phone with me for an hour and like help me brainstorm what it could be.
Fair enough. I've got to assume, and you know what, Maggie Lerman, if you're listening, I would love to have you on the show, and I will ask you some of these questions as well.
And she's an author too. Maggie is
better than the average writer. I'm sorry.
Maggie's an author as well.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's perfect. So next time you've got a book, I assume Maggie Lerman listens every week. Next time you've got a book, come on, let's talk about it, and we'll get some insight into editing Leila Sales as well. But I've got to imagine that you've got to be a little bit easier to work with than the average writer, because you're going to take feedback a little bit more laid back. You're going to understand what's needed when it's told, even if you don't maybe agree with it or like it. You at least probably, you speak the language, you know what she needs and why she's asking for it, right?
Yes.
Well, there you go.
I don't know that I get like any, I think what I'm saying is like, I'm no less like emotional about it than any other writer is. Like when I get negative feedback, there's no part of me that's like, well, you have given negative feedback many times, and so of course it's just like, this is nothing personal, and so on and so forth. It's like I still feel as upset as any other writer would,
What do you do with that? Because I assume you can't throw a fit. You can't. You don't want to make a stink. How do you deal with that when you've got those feelings and you have to do something that you don't want to do?
I mean, you feel bad for a while. Sometimes I'll call one of my writer friends and complain to them. And, I think you like need colleagues who like go through similar things in their careers and who could say things to you like, oh, that's so unfair. And because you can say it back to them. Sometimes I'll email my editor, or sorry, not my editor. Don't go to your editor if you're upset. But I'll email my agent, and he'll email me back, and he'll say like, this is very disappointing. And even just knowing that someone's in your corner and you're not alone, you're like, okay, yeah, like, yeah, it's not so bad because I have people who are like in it with me.
Do you foresee yourself eventually transitioning to not nothing but writing full time and exclusively writing, or do you love editing enough that you're always going to be doing some level of editing?
I hope to always be doing some level of editing. I mean, that was, when I moved to Austin, people were like, that's great, you can write full time. And I was like, who said I want to write full time? I want to write full time. I love helping authors craft their books. I love it. I wouldn't want to give that up unless I had to. I mean, if I was in a situation where, like, gun to my head, I had to either write my own books or edit books, I think I'd probably choose to write my own books. But, like, hopefully no one will ever put a gun to my head and make me choose.
Just choose long enough to get away from that person, and then you do whatever you want.
Yeah, totally.
However, James Caan got out of that house in misery. Do that, and then go back to whatever you want. And then what is the most satisfying thing about being an editor and helping an author achieve the dream of whatever book that you're working on together?
I mean, that's it, right? Like helping them achieve their dream. It feels like putting together a puzzle, and so that like satisfying feeling of when you like, every time you connect a piece and you're like, yes, like that's where it goes. And then when you like put the last piece in and you're like, you're like, there it is. It's the whole puzzle. I did it. It's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, you've helped someone achieve their dreams. You've like helped make something really good. You know that it would be different had it been in somebody else's hands. So like it makes you feel like you had a positive impact.
I know something I've talked with a number of other writers, sometimes on the show, sometimes off, about. I don't have I'm sure there probably is a word for whatever this experience is, but that experience where it's either your subconscious speaks to you, but it feels like the muse has spoken to you and presented a story solution, or you're off doing something completely unrelated to your book, and then you find the vision of whatever chapter you need, whatever story moment you need, whatever the character motivation is that was missing comes to you, and then the book is much better, and you think, well, this couldn't have been me that has been working and focusing on this whole time. This had to be something external that came through. Maybe yes, maybe no. That's a debate for folks smarter than I am. But does that same experience repeat itself when you're editing someone else's work or some version?
Yes. And it's not as, you don't spend as much time kind of like obsessing over trying to find that thing that makes it easier, because it's not your book. But yes, totally, I'll do the thing where I'm like, riding my bike and sort of like thinking through what it is that we have in somebody's book, and I'm like, what do we need? What, like in the most recent Last Kids on Earth book example, Last Kids on Earth book as an example that I was editing, it was like there was this thing in it where like everybody really wants this thing, but it just wasn't clear why they wanted the thing. I was like, the thing is not like an inherently good thing to have, and people are willing, like multiple characters are willing to sacrifice a lot in order to have it. So like we have to know what is motivating them to like want this thing so badly. And so the author and I talked for ages, just kind of round and round, for multiple days, of being like, maybe the thing they want is a different thing, or maybe they want it, maybe the thing that they want actually comes with this perk or that perk or whatever it is that makes it a thing that's worth having. And ultimately, I mean, we went through so many different ideas, and ultimately the author pitched something. He was like, maybe if you had this thing, then like, then you could also like do this other thing that like would be beneficial. And I was like, okay, like I was like, you have something there. It's not exactly that. It's not exactly the thing you just said, but I think it's going to be something like similar to that, sort of like taking the idea that you had, but like twisting it in this way. And that feels like really rewarding. You're like, yeah, there is a problem, and like I help solve it.
An esteemed audience knows I have to ask, because I ask everybody. Leila Sales, have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
Not that I'm aware of, unfortunately. I don't know why I said unfortunately. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know if that's fortunate or unfortunate.
Depends on the ghost, I suppose.
Yeah, that seems true.
Hopefully it's a nice, friendly ghost, in which case wouldn't it be nice if it would introduce itself?
You should have, my friend Courtney Scheinmel writes some middle grade, and you should have her on, because I believe she has seen a ghost.
Oh, yeah?
I think so.
Cool. Well, she's going to be getting an email from me. We love a good ghost story here. Well, I do. I assume, esteemed audience. They keep tuning in, so I assume if nothing else, it's not a detriment. So that's good. Well, just a couple of brief questions, because and then we'll think about landing this thing, because you've been very generous with your time, and I always want to end while we're still having fun. Yeah. I know that you give presentations. People can go to your website right now, leilasales.com, and find out more information, because they've heard how eloquent you are, how wonderful you are at expressing yourself. They're going to want more of this. They're going to want to hear what you have to say. But I know you give a presentation on what authors need to know about the business of publishing. Mm-hmm. What kind of taste can you give us just for free? What do authors need to know?
In that presentation, I talk about a lot of different things, as sort of like what the different departments at a publisher are doing, sort of who's taking care of what. But a lot of, I will say, like the kind of tidbit that I'll give you in advance is that I talk a fair bit about finances. I feel like most authors, even authors who are published, have so little understanding of the finances, and they sign their contract and often like don't really know what it is that they're signing. They're like so excited just to have a book out in the world that that maybe the rest of it kind of eludes them. So going over like, okay, like here's how advances work, here's how royalties work, here's how bonuses work, and what makes a book profitable, and the kind of stuff that many authors are like, oh, like I'm not a math person. It's like, well, like when it's your income, you should be at least a little bit of a math person.
Well, I assume that once the book comes out and everyone loves it, there's great fame, and then fortune follows, right? That's just how that works.
Sure. That's the one slide in my PowerPoint. It just shows raining dollar bills, and then I move on.
Sure, it's a very short presentation.
Yeah.
Congratulations, author! You've won.
You did it.
And then what editors wish writers knew? What should writers know about editors that's not commonly known?
So I do, as I said, I wrote an article about this for Publishers Weekly, and I highly recommend the article because I say like everything in it. But I think the thing that I most want authors to be aware of is that just how little time editors spend with manuscripts and authors that they don't already have signed up. That is to say, submissions. I think like as a writer and you send a submission, it's a picture book submission and it takes you 4 months to hear back. And you're like, what is this? It's 500 words. Like, couldn't you just read it and respond to me, tonight? So if you understand what editors actually spend their time doing and how little of it is focused on reading submissions and how much of it is focused on working with the manuscripts that they already have acquired, I think things start to make more sense and at least seem less like they're just ignoring you.
And what have you got coming next? What can we be looking forward to?
Ooh, good question. In terms of teaching, I know I'm teaching a one-off class about the sort of like how the basics of how book publishing works. It's an intro to publishing class, intro to Kidlit. I'm teaching that for the illustration department. I think in August. There's a good chance I'll have something before then, but that's the one I know I have scheduled. And then I'm writing another middle grade with Abrams right now, which hopefully will come out in fall 22, but I would have to finish it first. So, we'll see.
Then I've got two last questions for you, and we'll call it a night. That's a plan?
That sounds great.
First one's impossible,
Right.
but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. Knowing that we do not know the future, or at least I don't.
Mm-hmm. I don't.
I don't want to make assumptions, but we've had this huge pandemic. We've seen it impact publishing. We're probably going to see it continue to impact us. How do you imagine, other than hopefully more remote work opportunities are going to be opening up, how do you foresee that impacting publishing as a whole, and how are you making plans to prepare yourself for those changes that are coming?
Yeah, I really don't know, and I think nobody knows, and that's part of what makes this so challenging. I think we are accustomed to believing that somebody knows, like maybe I don't know, but my boss knows, or my boss's boss knows, or, the president knows, or whatever it is. So sort of coming to the terms of like publishers haven't said very much about what the future is going to look like, not because they're withholding that information, but because they genuinely haven't figured it out yet. So, I think some of it's going to be business as usual, and people hopefully will still want books. And, I've heard the argument made that with so much time off from filming new TV content that maybe there's going to be more of a market for books, because that's something that can keep, being generated and coming out during a pandemic. But yeah, I don't know, but I hope that I am relevant in whatever it is.
So it is my hope that people are spending enough time. There's only so much Netflix you can watch. There's only so many video games you can play.
Read a book.
People are rediscovering their love of reading, and there are readers that had fallen out of habit that are back in and hungry for more books.
I would very much like that to be the case.
Me too. And then my last question for you is always some variation. If you could go back to any point in your writing career, the very start, somewhere in the middle, wherever would be useful to you, and give yourself some advice that would have made a huge difference for your career and might make a huge difference in the career of all the writers who are listening or watching us, what would you go back and tell yourself, and what would you tell them?
Something that would have made a huge difference in my career. I don't know exactly what this would have looked like played out, but my most successful book was this YA novel called The Song Will Save Your Life, which came out in 2013. It's been translated into 12 languages, and literally to this day, as in like 3 hours ago, I, get messages from readers about how much it meant to them. And I think there was probably some way to parlay that into greater success that I did not do. And that's unfortunate, because now it's, it's like the most successful moment of my career was 8 years ago, and hopefully there will be future highs that I have yet to reach. But publishing is not, it's not like a straight mountain or like career ladder sort of thing. You can have great highs followed by lots of not so highs. It's not like, once you have one really successful book, then everything else after that is guaranteed to be successful. So sort of, appreciate the successes while you have them. Do what you can to parlay them into more successes. And then I guess like don't compare the other things that are not like that to that same moment. Just kind of enjoy each thing for what it is.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media, all that good stuff?
I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Leila Sales Books, with the weird spelling of my name, Leila. And then my website is just lilasales.com.
This has been absolutely tremendous. Thank you so much for making time for me, for esteemed audience who is headed to your website right now to book you for additional speaking, because we just got the free taste tonight. They would have want the full deal. As always, esteemed audience, head to middlegradeninja.com, where you can read interviews with all the best people, all the editors, all the literary agents, all the authors, everyone who's good in this world has appeared at middlegradeninja.com, or eventually will. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.